school full-fledged. So we're grateful for everybody being here. And man, we missed all y'all being here with us. But maybe next time. Deacons and elders. This week you've been studying specifically about deacons, but since we weren't here last week together, we were unable to study the topic of elders. And coincidentally, the Bible, when speaking about one, kind of couples the lessons about the other with it. So if you will, we'll start with 1 Timothy chapter 3. We'll get to that in just a moment. But 1 Timothy chapter 3 begins to show us a little bit into the qualifications, if you will, of elders and deacons. And there's a few things that we would like for us to note there in just a moment. A few months back, if I'm not mistaken, I know that we began the conversation, or we at least had the conversation in class, about what each of our deacons do within this congregation. And I encourage you, if you did not take the opportunity to do so, to get to know the specific works of each of our deacons. And not just to know, okay, well, our finance guy is Andrew Moore, or our education guy is Andrew Bush, but to really understand what those things entail. And I think, especially for our deacons, as well as for our elders, and as well as for most of the works that go on here at the church, a lot of stuff is done behind the scenes. Nobody recognizes. And so when you begin to understand a little bit of what these people do, not just the elders, not just the deacons, but the congregation as a whole, when you really understand what people do, you can grow to be more grateful for these things. You understand what goes into them, what amount of effort and time goes into these things. It helps you to have a better appreciation of it. And so for the sake of our lesson today, I want to encourage you to, at some point, you can go on the website, you can go out to the boxes. There's a list somewhere in the hallway and in the office as well. If you'd like one, I'll make sure to get you one, of what our deacons do and what they're responsible for. And one of the most important things that we do here at Luverne is our elders do a great job at choosing our deacons' jobs specifically for them. And this is something that I told them when I first got here, that I commended their choice of deacons and who they had put in which positions. Because if you really look at it, they're really good fit. I mean, who better to put as the treasurer than a banker? I mean, that's pretty good fitting. But, I also pick at him sometimes and say, Judas was also the treasurer, so you got to watch out for old Andrew over there. No, a great guy. We're grateful for what he does here. But when you really understand, okay, what these people do, and what it takes to get these things done, you'll gain a better understanding of really how much work and effort is put into these things. The things that might go unnoticed or overlooked. And one person I would also like to mention at this time that specifically by name, she's going to kill me for it, is Miss Glinda. Miss Glinda does so much that people don't always see. And then if she doesn't do something, guess what? People are going to notice. That's how it works. Just like the AV room. Everybody doesn't notice what the AV room does until they don't do it right. Everybody knows this kind of thing. A lot of these things are thankless jobs that are done by the congregation, but have become necessary for our functioning, and we're grateful for them. And so I would really encourage you to take the time this week to send a text, to make a call, to write a card, this or the other, even just to have a conversation with one of our elders, deacons, and many of the servants here who do so much, and just really thank them for something that they have done. And I know that they don't do it for the praise, that's why they do it behind the scenes. But really thank them for what they've done and really show your appreciation for that. As we dive into 1 Timothy chapter 3, you'll notice very quickly that Timothy, or when you read this writing here in 1 Timothy, you'll notice in chapter 3, verse 1, the statement is made that I believe is a very beautiful introduction to the topic of elders and deacons. He says that the saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. Now we think about the way in which language is chosen, or the words that are chosen specifically to make mention of this. Notice he says, the saying is trustworthy. What's another way of saying the phrase, the saying is trustworthy? It's the truth. This is the truth of the matter, we might say. The truth of the matter is, anyone who desires the office of an overseer, a bishop, a shepherd, an elder, they desire for a noble task. When we think about the word noble, what's some of the first things that come to mind other than Mr. Joe and Miss Francis? What's some of the things that come to our minds when we think about noble? Oh, and Mr. Floyd. other than them and him. What are some of the things that come to mind when we think about noble? Royal, maybe. Upright. Upright, not uptight. Y'all remember that? That's the important part. That's the nobility aspect of it. Honor. I think of it like knighthood. You think about a knight as a very noble thing. I think bravery might be one. Honesty, integrity. Noble is a very complimentary phrase. And so for the choice of the word noble to be used here is to place within our mindsets that this task that is at hand, that those who seek after it desire this noble task, this task that is at hand is something that brings with it great honor or great respect, or maybe it brings with it a great weight of responsibility even with it. And so to desire this task is to desire a noble task. And the saying is trustworthy. This means this saying is truthful. The one who desires this office as an overseer, a bishop, a shepherd, desires a very noble, respectful, honorable task. Notice what is said here though. Therefore an overseer, this one who is of this noble task, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, does not love money. He must manage his own household well with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if anyone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace, into the snare of the devil. So we look at these descriptions here. These descriptions beginning in verse 2 are other descriptions of this noble thing. If this office is a noble task, if this thing to be desired is a very noble position, then it would be fitting that the description of the one who is to hold this office is a description of someone who is noble, or is a noble description, fits this noble description. So you see here, we look at these things. Above reproach, husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not violent, not drunkard, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money, manages his own household well. These things are very noble in description. These fittings are descriptions of this office, and those who hold this office are very, very much things to be desired. Now, one thing that we always talked about in school, and one thing that we have always discussed, even when we've talked about the idea here that I would like to bring up again, is whether or not you will ever meet the full qualifications of an elder, whether or not you have the desire to be an elder, whether or not you're even a man. These things are desirable features. Now, you might have to change some of them, like the husband of one wife. If you're a woman, yeah, you probably shouldn't do that. But you look at these things and go, okay, you are committed to the relationship fully. Your love is one that is dedicated to one, and to do so with a lifetime dedication. That's a very noble thing. So you look at these things and go, okay, this overseer, they must be above reproach. What's this idea of reproach? What is this idea of being above reproach? It's just not so prideful to think that you're perfect, but that you need help as well. But also, above reproach means that someone couldn't say something against you and falsely accuse you and it be believable. Oh, such and such. Well, he's nothing but a no good wife beater. No, he's not. He's a kind, gentle person. He's above this idea of being spoken out against. Why? Because his actions reflect this thing that allows for him to be above reproach. Not that he is completely and totally perfect and sinless, but rather that he is above this idea of being spoken out against. His actions reflect these things. We think about some of these descriptions for elders and deacons. These are very important things, and one thing I didn't mention was that idea of the desire. We always mention the desire is the first aspect or the first qualification to be met. And so this desire that is to be met is this first aspect. You have to desire this thing. It's not an easily desirable thing. There's a lot of hardship maybe that's piled upon this. There's a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of punishment in the event that it's done wrong, which means to desire this thing means, okay, you've got to think this thing through a little bit. And you'll never fully understand it. I guarantee you, if you ask Mr. Dale and Mr. Stay, 3 years ago. If they knew what they were stepping into and what it would bring over the next 3 years, they probably would go, I have no idea. And I know that I personally have sat down with them 2 years ago when all this mess with COVID started. And you think about, okay, how can you anticipate something so life-changing, something that reflects in our everyday lives? It reflects how we communicate with each other, how we are in the presence of each other. These things can be completely uprooted, twisted around, and then you're just expected to just deal with it. That's a lot of pressure to be put on somebody. That's one of the reasons why we see this idea of not just having one elder or one person to be responsible for the whole congregation. It's this community of people, or this gathering together, this collection of people to help with the bearing of this responsibility. Notice also, so not just above reproach, the husband of one wife. Like we mentioned, this idea of this love that is dedicated to one, this great deal of commitment. We think about the relationships that we have and the people that we share our love with. You know, I've got family in all different parts of the country. I've got people who aren't blood relatives, but I consider to be like family. I've got brothers and sisters that never came from my mother and my father, but they're just like brothers and sisters to me. And we think about the love that we share for people. At the end result, the most important, second to God Himself, the most important relationship that we have is the commitment that we have made in marriage. This commitment of loving someone until death do you part. This thing that God has established is this beautiful relationship that allows for you to start on this journey and to go through this journey of life together. This is one of the most important things. And so as one who is given the responsibility of maintaining the focus and the validity of the worship and the faithfulness of the congregation, as one who is going to be put in that position, who becomes responsible for this congregation and what they're to do for the kingdom of God, their focus and their love and their mindset has to be shown in their commitment to those who they love and care for. If someone doesn't love and care for their own spouse, how are they going to care for somebody who they haven't made that lifetime commitment to? If they don't show that commitment to each other in such a very deep and sincere way, how are they going to be able to handle other situations? I believe one of the other reasons why something like this is thrown in here is you know, you talk about the idea of the helpmeet, wife being the helpmeet, this, that, and the other. It means that as the elders labor together, so do their wives. Another person that you might write a text or send a text or write a card or give a call this week is our elders' wives and our deacons' wives, thanking them for their role that they play within the help of this congregation. And listen, I've been places where that hadn't always been a good thing, but we're very blessed here, and I'm not just saying that because they're both staring at me right now. You know, I'd say that behind their backs too. We're very blessed here in that aspect as well. But look also, sober-minded. Oh, this one's an important one. This one's an important one. Why would it be important for elders to be sober-minded? Say it again. Clear of thinking. Means what? I can maybe remove pride from the situation. I can remove prejudice from the situation. I can clearly think so that the decision that is made so with the right mindset or with the God-focused mindset rather than with clouded judgment. You know, we think about Solomon's writing on different things, and he makes mention of this idea, and he even includes this a few down the road, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard. Solomon writes about the dangers of alcohol, and one of the things that he makes mention of is he does not believe that someone in a position of authority should ever consume alcohol, and for the purpose of it not allowing for him to be sober-minded in his judgment. In fact, Solomon says that in a way in which you can overthrow, even David would write this on his deathbed as he was telling his sons how to overthrow some of the other nations that opposed the nation of Israel. David would even make mention of the idea of allowing for these kings, or getting these kings who stand against you to no longer be sober-minded as a way of overthrowing their kingdom. So to be sober-minded is very important. If you can't think clearly, if you can't focus, if you're clouded in your judgment, then the decisions that are going to be made are going to be the wrong decisions. Whether or not it works out in the end, it's going to be the wrong decisions because it was made with clouded judgment. Got to be clear of these things, able to focus on what God has for us in plan rather than what man has. Self-controlled, another very important one. It kind of goes back to the same aspect. Respectable. Hospital, and actually pause there for a second. Self-controlled, you look at it, self-control is one of those umbrella, statements kind of thing. Self-control can include a lot of these other things in it. And if you have yourself under control, you can focus on some of these other things. James, in his writing about self-control, specifically on the writing of the tongue, said what? If someone can bridle their tongue, they will be what? Y'all remember? Perfect. If they can have full control of themselves, including their tongue, they will be perfect. Okay, so to be under self-control is a very important aspect of Christianity. What about respectable? This one's going to be mentioned again a little bit down below. Respectable is very important as well. Hospitable, able to teach, this, that, and the other. Not a drunkard, not violent or gentle, but gentle and not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. When we look at hospitable, I want y'all to know something that y'all might not know. And they'll probably get on to me for this later. But when Sydney and I moved here, we weren't married at the time, which means we weren't going to live in the same house. So I lived in the preacher's house with John Hayden, and not in the same room, different rooms. But I lived in the preacher's house with John Hayden. Sydney lived with Mr. Stay and Miss Heather, but Mr. Dell and Miss Julie also offered the same deal. Also offered to open up their homes and allow for us to live within their homes. Welcomed us into both of their homes, allowing for us to have a place to stay, or allowing for Sydney to be able to stay somewhere. So you look at this idea of hospitable. Very hospitable in nature, meaning what? They care about others. They're focusing not just on their needs, but they're caring about others. I'm a very private person in a lot of ways. I like my house as a place that I can go home to. I like to be relaxed and be able to go home. And it's a very safe space for me to just be home and be able to have somewhere. And so to welcome somebody into that shows a great deal of trust and of love and respect. Meaning I'm welcoming you into the place that I have considered my place of solitude. And so to be hospitable means that you are to be looking after the needs of others. And you'll see that again here in just a second. Able to teach. Now when we look at this, and sometimes our minds go to, well, they must always teach Bible class and teach sermons or preach sermons. No, able to teach means able to show somebody what it means to be a follower of Christ. Whether that's across a dinner table on a one-on-one conversation, or whether that's in front of a crowd of 1,000 people. Able to teach means that they're willing and able to share the gospel. They don't always look the same. One might be good at one and one might be good at the other. This, that, and the other. But it's important that they're able to show somebody Jesus. That's essential. You're going to lead people to Jesus. You better be able to show people how to get to Jesus. Not a drunkard. Once again, goes back to that idea of sober-mindedness and self-controlled. Not violent but gentle. Once again, self-controlled. Not quarrelsome. Once again, self-controlled. Not a lover of money. Remember the teachings about Jesus' teachings about money. He says that it is easier for a camel to pass through what? The eye of a needle, than for a rich man or for a lover of money to pass into the kingdom of heaven. Okay, I don't know if you've ever seen an eye of a needle in a camel, but they're not easy to go through. Okay, so it's this big expression. It's almost impossible. Why? Because if you're blinded by something like that, then you're unable to see clearly some of the other scenarios that might pop up in life. That once again goes back to this idea of sober-minded or self-controlled, not being clouded in judgment. Notice also, he must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. Now this one's one of them that's filled with controversy, because you never know, okay, does this mean that because it says children, he's got to have multiple children? Once they've gotten out of the house, does that change things? Well, I do believe so. You look here in verse 4. He must manage his own household well. All right, y'all ready? Let's read that again. He must manage his own household well. What really opened my eyes to this situation was my father called me while I was in school one time. And he kind of said thank you, and I apologized, and also kind of wanted me to say thank you as well. We were talking about just upbringing. We had gotten to the point where I was out of the house, I was on my own, making my own decisions, not necessarily, obviously I had still the responsibility to respect my father, but he wasn't demanding every little thing in my life. He wasn't in control of every little thing in my life anymore. And he one thing that he said to me was the importance of, we even go back to that idea of train up your child in the way that they should go, and when they're older they will not depart from it. You think about these teachings on these lessons that we see in Scripture. It's important that we instill within our children, and it's important that we instill within everybody a love for Jesus. But at the end of the day, it's their own personal decisions. When they're out on their own, you cannot control that. It's out of your control. That's why when we see this writing here, we see he must manage his own household well. You see that before you ever see anything about him mentioning anything about children. He must manage his own household well. Notice also this though, with all dignity. I don't want us to ever overlook that phrase, with all dignity. What does that word dignity imply here? What does it mean? We talked about noble. What about dignity? Respectfully. Respectfully. You think about the mindset that the children have towards the parents. And this is not the only place. In fact, you'd see it being written about in the Old Testament when talking about the relationship between fathers and children. You talk about this idea of respect being an important aspect. Before we ever mention children at all, he mentions two things: ruling his own household well, but also to do so with dignity, in a very respectful and honoring way. Notice also he says, keeping his children submissive. That is an aspect of it. The children in the home, he's to do so with all dignity. He's to do so having good control over them. Notice also the importance behind this, verse 5. For if someone does not know how to manage his own, notice that, his own household, how will he care for God's churches? Pretty basic. I mean, that's pretty understanding. You don't want the mechanic whose car's always broken down. You know, that kind of thing. You know, it's like, okay, if you can't fix your own car, how can I trust you going to fix my car? Kind of thing. If they don't have control over their own household well, why are we going to allow for them or to trust them to do something like be responsible for the Lord's church? Notice also in this, you get this very, very important aspect to this, that dignity always needs to be remembered, to do so with great honor. Meaning not just his children honor him, but he is honorable in his actions in doing it. We'll talk a little bit about that next week on Father's Day. Talk about that honor involved with fatherhood. Verse 6, he must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. That seems pretty obvious there too. You know, you think about somebody who's going to lead you. You probably don't want them to just have figured out how to do something and then expect them to go teach everybody else about it, or expect them to be the leader of everybody else. Pretty common knowledge there on that one. Self-explanatory. That's what I was looking for. Verse 7 as well. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace and into the snare of the devil. We made mention that this would pop up again when we saw the word respectable. It needs to be well thought of by outsiders. What does the phrase outsiders mean? Who's he talking about? The world, non-Christians. People who aren't Christians. Why is that important? Why is that essential? That's who you're trying to convert. That's who you're trying to reach. If you don't have the respect of people who are outside the church, how are you going to ever reach them? How are you ever going to bring them into the church? So you look at these descriptions, and they're not just, okay, that's not just, okay, well, we got this bullet point, and you know, you got to meet all these things. These are to be qualities that we recognize. You know, we talk about the idea of appointing elders, or recognizing elders, this, that, and the other. And when we look at the charges given in Scripture, very rarely, and I say this very rarely because it does occur. In fact, it occurs given the responsibility to Timothy, and Paul did it as well. Given the responsibility of appointing these things. But when we appoint elders, what we do is we are acknowledging elders. These things aren't just to be the case or descriptions of people because we say they are. We're to just recognize what's already there. They don't have to become self-controlled because they're going to be an elder. They need to be self-controlled, and we recognize that aspect in them. They don't have to become hospitable just so that they can be an elder. Okay? It's not a job application here. It's, okay, they're hospitable. Therefore, that's something that they can improve on as well. But they're hospitable. We recognize these things, and then we acknowledge those as elders. So we look at these qualifications of overseers. I want us to focus on verse 4 very quickly here, because it's one that causes a great deal of misunderstanding, and one that causes a great deal of conversations, if you will. And I'll be honest with you, when I get done with this class, there's probably going to be a great deal of conversations about what I say about verse 4. But I want us to notice something. Look at verse 12 and look at verse 4. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. Somebody read the New King James if you got it, and somebody read the King James if you got it. Start with the New King James if somebody's got it.
One that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all reverence.
Okay, somebody in the King James read that as well, as please. That was King James? Okay, the New King James.
One who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence.
One who rules his household well, having his children in subjection with all reverence, or with all respect, with all dignity. Now let's go over to verse 12. Let's look at verse 12 here. Let deacons each be the husband of one wife. That was made mention of for elders in verse 2. Managing their children and their own households well. What's the difference between verse 4 and verse 12? I'll give you a hint. Verse 12 doesn't mention the phrase in all reverence or all dignity. And it also includes in verse 12 the make mention of the one husband of one wife, which is mentioned in verse 2 for the elders and the deacons. When we look at these qualities, this quality of ruling the household well and doing so with children who are obedient or submissive is not only for elders, it's also for deacons. And so when we look at these things, okay, you look at some of these descriptions given, and we'll go over them again in just a second. When you look at some of these qualifications for deacons and some of the qualifications for elders, a lot of them line up in many different ways. And that's for a purpose. That's for a reason. It's so that when we look at these things, we go, okay, these are both offices that are to be desired. These are both to look at qualities in these people who we recognize as our elders and as our deacons. But a lot of these are very, very similar. A lot of these make mention even of the same things. Let's start with verse 8. Deacons likewise must be dignified. They must be not double-tongued. Actually, let's talk about this for a second. Dignified and noble. What's the difference? Not much. Very, very close in description. Yes?
I think sometimes there's a difference too in a parent having respect for their children because they demand it or because they deserve it.
Deserve it, yeah.
I've seen men that their children obey them out of pure fear,
Yeah.
not because they respect it. So I think there's a big difference. If you're only this disciplinary that they're so scared of that they obey you because of that, then they're not going to respect you for
Yeah.
that.
You need the congregation's respect, not their fear. You won't be able to rule with fear in something like that. So therefore, your own household as well. Same with the children.
To a certain point where they realize, they can't beat me. Then they still need to respect you. That's like you still respect your dad,
Yeah.
not because now he can take away your phone or take away your car or whatever, but because he earned that
Yeah.
because of the way he treated you and your mother, things like that. So I mean, I think I've just seen different families do it different ways,
Yeah.
and when you do it just out of fear, it's not really a real respect that you will have once you leave their home.
My dad told me one time, we were actually having a conversation about this very thing. And the example that he used was the moment when his father had knee replacement surgery. And he went out and cut the grass because his dad called him and asked him to come cut the grass. He said, my dad is down in the dumps right now. He can't even walk, much less whoop me. He's like, there's no fear in that, but there's respect. Fear only goes so far. That's why we talk about when we look at even the fear of God. Even the fear of God only goes so far. That's why the greatest motivation is to be what? Love. Same thing in authority. Fear only goes so far, but respect and love, they go all the way.
That could be the progression. It could be applying that reference there to the elder or the deacon, but it also could be, I think, probably more accurately, that's a progression from deacons. It's not mentioned there. Those children have no idea what reference is. But then, on the elder side of it, it's with all reverence.
Yeah.
Children being obedience with all reverence. It could be applied that way, and it makes more sense to me that way, because now the children are grown and involved.
They understand that honor. Yeah.
I'm not certain that it seems logical.
Yeah. If you're unable to hear Mr. Dale, one of the things he says, it seems to be the case, or it seems to be because that phrase, all reverence or all dignity, thrown in with the elders, it's this understanding that as the child gets older, have a better understanding of this reverence or this better understanding of respect. You know, when you're 4, you might not understand what respect is. You might show it, but you might not know what it means. This, that, and the other. Yes, ma'am.
Also in the congregation, they, deacons and elders have this like this. But as a congregation, we have to recognize that they are doing all those
Yeah.
qualifications. And we have to give them the respect.
Yeah.
Just because of the role they have filled, it's our responsibility to give them that respect. Just the fact that they're born or whatever. We can't be a congregation second guessing.
Yeah, that's true. And one thing that's very important is that as well is you see these aspects listed, and it's not every man for himself in this. It's not, okay, Mr. Dale, Mr. Stay, y'all got to meet these qualifications. You better do it on your own. No, it's we shouldn't have to test patience to see whether or not they're patient people. We should always be helping them in doing this. That's the point of a family, the point of a congregation within itself, is to help each other. That means that they're not just striving for these things on their own, but they're doing so with the support and with the love of the congregation. And without that, it causes problems. You know, if you don't have that love and respect of the congregation, they're not going to work with you. And that's something that I want us to make sure that we always understand is, even in a position that I'm in, where I'm on the payroll kind of thing, I always, and they have included this in their statements to me, it's not this working for, it's this working with. We are co-laborers. Now, yes, at the end of the day, they are my bosses, yeah, I'll give you that, at the end of the day, but we'll work together towards something, which means that there's got to be a great deal of respect and communication within those endeavors. We can't achieve, we made mention of that literally from the very beginning since I've been here. The first sermon that I ever made from the pulpit as the preacher here at this congregation. We made mention of this importance of working together, of setting aside differences, of striving for unity, of striving for love, of striving for the main goal of working together. And if we don't work together, then this whole congregation is just going to run into the ground. There's your happy moment for this morning. But you think about it, these things are so important. We hadn't even gotten into the aspects, and it's because Timothy just hadn't specifically mentioned them here, of the great deal of pressure, sorry, Mr. Dale, of the great deal of pressure placed upon leaders, on teachers. They've got to answer for what they do as it pertains to you. You think of the responsibility of a father. The father's got responsibility to his family, to his household. Mother's got responsibility to her children. Father's got responsibility to the children and to the wife. Elders have the responsibility to their wives, their children, and the congregation. And so it's this great deal of added pressure upon them. That's why I make mention of things like thanking them for what they do and expressing your thanks for the actions that they do. Do they always make the right choices? Probably not. And you know what? They'd be the first to tell you that as well. I hope. Let's hope. If not, it's going to make for a very awkward meeting next week between me and the elders. But we'll see. No, they make mistakes. Why? Because they're human. But that's where the love comes in. That's where the respect comes in. Your parents, did they make mistakes? Yeah. Yeah. Did you ever make a mistake as a parent? No, because we're all perfect, right? No. We make mistakes. We don't always do things right. That's where that respect and that love comes in. That's where that's necessary. That's where that communication and that working together comes in. If we can't do these things effectively, we're not going to do anything to help grow the church. That's why it's so important that, yes, these elders have to meet these qualifications, but at the same time, do you see the amount of writings that Paul also puts on churches at Corinth, Galatia, Philippi, all these different places where he talks about loving one another, bearing each other's burdens, or helping one another through tough trials. These pressures aren't just placed on elders, you got to meet these qualifications, do all these things. There's pressures placed upon the congregation to work together towards something. And in doing so under the leadership or under the guidance of men who have been chosen or recognized and appointed to lead this congregation to do what is faithful in the eyes of God. And when we look at these deacons here, you look at this idea of being dignified. Once again, that's one of some of the same language, at least, that is used in this idea of this noble task being placed upon the elders. They're to be dignified, and what is included within that? Not being double-tongued. But what else is included in that? Not being addicted to wine, much wine. Not to be greedy or dishonest for gain. They must hold the mystery of faith with a clear conscience, having an understanding of why they believe or what it is that they're following after. Verse 10, let them also be tested first, Let them serve as deacons if they prove themselves to be blameless. Their wives, likewise, must be dignified, not slanderers, but sober-minded, faithful in all things. Let the deacons each be the husband of one wife, managing their children and their own household well. For those who serve well as deacons gain a good standing for themselves, and also great confidence in the faith that is in Christ Jesus, or that is in Jesus Christ. So you look at these descriptions given of these deacons and these elders. These are very noble and honorable tasks, but they're very noble and honorable because the descriptions match the qualifications, so to speak. You look at somebody who's honorable. Somebody who's honorable is not double-tongued. Somebody who is honorable is not greedy. Somebody who's honorable is not dishonest. These things have to be met in order for you to be honorable. And God says, notice here in verse 13, those who serve as deacons gain a good standing for themselves and also great confidence in the faith that is in Christ Jesus. These things are beneficial to those who serve in these positions. But at the same time, there's great amount of pressure and great responsibility placed upon these individuals as well. We look at the roles filled by the elders and the deacons. And we look at the role that they play within the leading of this congregation. It's very, very important that they're dedicated to this work. And at the same time, it's important for us to be respectful and to be honorable in our treating of them as well. So when we see somebody who's in need or struggling or maybe has something that they're trying to overcome as far as is beneficial to the congregation, help them out. Do something for them. Encourage them. Strengthen them. Do something to help them out. We'll pick up next week. I didn't even touch the PowerPoint at all today, man. We'll pick up next week on the topic of fathers. Of course, I should have remembered that.